3 months after sister left her daughter with me, fate takes a wild turn. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. It took exactly 92 days for a missing persons case to turn into a high-society fraud investigation. My name is Marcus. I run a quiet, dusty antique restoration shop in a working-class neighborhood where the rain always seems to wash the color out of the asphalt. My life was mostly wood glue, sandpaper, and absolute solitude, right up until the night my sister, Chloe, vanished, leaving her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, sitting quietly on my worn leather couch. For 3 agonizing months, I played the exhausting dual role of a terrified amateur detective and an overwhelmed surrogate father. I spent my nights staring at a silent phone, legitimately wondering if my sister was dead in a ditch somewhere. I spent my days trying to coax a traumatized little girl out of her shell, making sure she ate, making sure she knew she wasn't just thrown away like garbage. Slowly, we settled into a very fragile rhythm. Lily started sleeping through the night without waking up screaming for her mother. I started breathing a little easier. And then, yesterday morning, everything completely shattered. I was sitting at my workbench, nursing a cold cup of black coffee, scrolling through the local news on my tablet. A sponsored article popped up, a glowing, high-society profile covering the upcoming nuptials of Julian Vance, a prominent heir whose family basically owned half the city's commercial skyline. Beside Julian, smiling radiantly in a designer silk dress, was his new fiancée. She was blonde now. Her teeth were perfectly veneered. The caption identified her as Clara Montgomery, an only child from a wealthy European family, a woman with a spotless pedigree and absolutely no past baggage. But the cold, calculating eyes staring out from the digital photograph belonged undeniably to my sister, Chloe. She wasn't dead. She wasn't missing. She had just shed her old life like a snake shedding its skin, leaving her own flesh and blood behind to rot so she could climb the social ladder completely unburdened. The nausea hit me like a physical blow. The sheer sociopathy of it was entirely paralyzing. If I exposed her, I risked triggering a chaotic legal battle that could tear Lily away. I realized I had to hunt my own sister down before she completely erased us. To understand the magnitude of the betrayal, you have to understand the night she left. It was a torrential Tuesday evening in late October. The rain was hammering against the tin roof of my restoration shop, drowning out the ambient noise of the city. Chloe hammered on my front door just past midnight. When I opened it, she was standing on the porch, completely soaked, gripping Lily roughly by the shoulder. Lily was clutching a worn, faded pink duffel bag that looked like it had been packed in absolute terror. "I need you to watch her," Chloe demanded, her voice entirely devoid of maternal warmth. She didn't ask, she issued an order. "I have a massive job interview out of state tomorrow morning. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, Marcus. I'll be back by Sunday night." I looked down at my niece. Lily was shivering, her dark eyes wide and incredibly hollow. Chloe didn't wait for my confirmation. She pushed the duffel bag into my chest, kissed the top of Lily's head with a sickeningly hollow performance of affection, and practically ran back to her idling sedan. I stood in the doorway, watching the red glow of her taillights bleed into the rainy darkness until they completely disappeared. I carried Lily inside, made her a cup of warm tea, and unzipped the duffel bag to organize her clothes. That was my first visceral realization that something was deeply wrong. Chloe hadn't packed for a weekend. The bag contained 3 pairs of outgrown jeans, a handful of mismatched socks, a single tattered teddy bear, and Lily's original birth certificate shoved carelessly into a plastic Ziploc bag. You do not pack a birth certificate for a weekend stay with an uncle. You pack it when you are permanently surrendering custody without having the courage to actually say the words out loud. I spent the rest of that night sitting in my armchair, watching Lily sleep on my sofa, feeling a cold, heavy knot of pure dread forming in my stomach. The silence of the shop felt different that night. It felt heavy with the devastating weight of a permanent, irreversible abandonment. I picked up my phone and dialed her number, only to hear the automated disconnection message. The first few weeks were a living, breathing nightmare of administrative chaos and psychological torture. Every single morning, Lily would sit at the small wooden table in my kitchen, swinging her legs, staring at the front door with a quiet, heartbreaking expectation. "Is Mommy coming today?" she would ask, her voice barely rising above a whisper. I had to look into the eyes of an innocent 7-year-old child and manufacture a convincing lie, telling her that her mother was just very busy with her new job. The truth was, Chloe had completely vaporized. The cell phone number she had used for the last 5 years was permanently disconnected by Wednesday afternoon. I drove to her apartment complex on the edge of the city, only to find the unit entirely empty. The landlord bluntly informed me she had broken her lease, paid the penalty in cold hard cash, and vanished without leaving a forwarding address. There was no job interview. There was no temporary trip. It was a methodical, premeditated extraction. The emotional toll of watching a child slowly realize she has been discarded is something that permanently alters your soul. By week 3, Lily stopped asking about the door. She stopped talking almost entirely. She would sit in the corner of my workshop, meticulously arranging wooden blocks, retreating deep into a silent, protective shell. I spent my evenings frantically calling distant relatives, mutual acquaintances, and even ex-boyfriends, desperately trying to find a single thread to pull. Nobody knew anything. Chloe had severed every single tie with surgical precision. The sheer isolation of our reality was terrifying. I was a bachelor with no parenting experience, suddenly wholly responsible for a traumatized human being. I was drowning in a sea of unspoken grief, trying to hold the pieces of my niece's shattered world together with nothing but sheer willpower and quiet desperation. The ghosting was not just an absence. It was a deeply violent act of emotional destruction directed at a child. I realized that surviving was not enough, and I had to start fighting back aggressively. The fragile bubble we had built around ourselves violently burst on a freezing Tuesday morning in early December. I woke up to the sound of Lily coughing, a deep, rattling sound that shook her tiny frame. By noon, her temperature had spiked to a terrifying 103 degrees. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I wrapped her in a heavy quilt, carried her to my truck, and sped to the nearest urgent care clinic. But when I stood at the reception desk, clutching my wallet, I slammed directly into a massive, unyielding legal brick wall. "I need to see her legal guardian's consent forms," the stern receptionist stated, tapping her pen against the glass partition. "Are you her father?" I explained the situation, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and pure rage. I presented the birth certificate Chloe had left behind, desperately hoping it would be enough. The receptionist's eyes softened with pity, but she shook her head. Without formal guardianship or assigned medical proxy, they were legally paralyzed. They could only stabilize her if it was a life-or-death emergency. Otherwise, they could not prescribe the strong antibiotics she desperately needed. I was completely powerless. I had to beg a sympathetic nurse to unofficially advise me on over-the-counter fever reducers, feeling like a complete failure as a protector. Watching Lily suffer, knowing I was legally barred from providing her proper care because of her mother's sociopathic selfishness, ignited a blinding, righteous fury inside me. We survived that night with cold compresses and sheer luck, but the reality was absolutely undeniable. I could not simply raise her in the shadows. I needed court-ordered emergency guardianship, and to get that, I had to formally prove her mother had abandoned her. The passive waiting game was permanently over. I could no longer just sit around and hope she would eventually call. I walked into my dark workshop and pulled Chloe's old abandoned laptop from the shelf. Chloe was a masterful liar, but she was entirely careless with her digital hygiene. Before she vanished, she had dumped a box of junk in my garage, including an old, battered laptop she claimed was totally broken. I spent 2 painstaking days repairing the damaged motherboard and bypassing the faulty power supply. When the screen finally flickered to life, I felt like a forensic investigator stepping into a pristine crime scene. It was password protected, but Chloe's narcissism was her absolute downfall. Her password was her own birthday, followed by the word queen. The desktop was a chaotic mess, but the browser history was a meticulously paved road leading directly to her new life. I dug through the cached files, the timestamps painting a terrifying picture of premeditation. Months before she abandoned Lily, she had been obsessively researching high society events, luxury real estate in neighboring states, and the legal intricacies of changing one's identity. I found a hidden, secondary email address logged into a forgotten mail client. I opened the inbox, the blue light of the screen illuminating my dark workshop. It was completely full of digital receipts. While Lily was wearing outgrown, frayed jeans, Chloe had been actively purchasing thousands of dollars worth of designer clothing, booking appointments at elite cosmetic dentistry clinics, and paying for intensive etiquette coaching sessions. She wasn't fleeing from debt or danger. She was systematically investing in a massive, fraudulent rebranding of her entire existence. The sheer volume of the deceit made my blood run entirely cold. She had budgeted out the cost of her physical transformation while completely ignoring her daughter's basic existence. Every single email was a nail in the coffin of the sister I thought I knew. I printed every single receipt, every confirmation number, and every damning timeline discrepancy. The final email I opened contained the confirmation for a luxury apartment in the city. Armed with the luxury apartment address and the timeline of her cosmetic procedures, I turned to the vast, unforgiving landscape of social media. I ran reverse image searches, cross-referenced the high-end boutiques from the receipts, and aggressively monitored the digital footprint of the wealthy zip code she had infiltrated. It took exactly 72 hours of relentless, sleep-deprived clicking to strike absolute gold. I found an Instagram profile under the name Clara Montgomery. The profile picture was a stunning, professionally lit headshot of my sister. Her dark hair was now a flawless, icy blonde. Her features were subtly sharpened by expensive cosmetic work, but the cold, calculating eyes were undeniably hers. The bio read, philanthropist, art enthusiast, soon to be Mrs. Vance. I scrolled through the meticulously curated feed, my stomach violently churning with every perfectly staged photograph. There she was, sipping champagne on private yachts, attending exclusive charity galas, and posing intimately with Julian Vance, a man whose family fortune was a cornerstone of the city's economy. The terrifying climax of my investigation came when I found a recorded video interview from a recent charity event. The reporter asked her about her background, probing for details about the mysterious new woman on Julian's arm. Chloe stared directly into the camera, her smile radiating a practiced, chilling warmth. I had a very quiet childhood. She purred smoothly, not breaking eye contact. I am an only child. Unfortunately, my parents passed away when I was quite young, so Julian's wonderful family is truly the only family I have now. She had completely erased us. I was dead to her. More importantly, Lily was dead to her. She had murdered her own daughter's existence to secure a massive inheritance and a glittering social crown. I knew right then that I had to completely destroy the phantom she had become. The realization that Chloe had publicly declared us dead completely shifted my strategy. I wasn't just dealing with a runaway mother anymore. I was dealing with a highly motivated, sociopathic fraudster who had everything to lose. I needed to let her know that the ghost of her past was actively hunting her, but I had to do it without tipping off her wealthy new mark. I found the contact information for the children's charity board she had recently joined, a sick, ironic twist considering she had abandoned her own child. I called the main office from a burner phone I purchased at a local convenience store. When the receptionist answered, asking how she could direct my call, I made sure my voice was calm, gravelly, and entirely devoid of emotion. Please leave a message for Clara Montgomery. I instructed slowly, ensuring every word was perfectly enunciated. Tell her that her brother, Marcus, found the pink duffel bag. Tell her that the little girl she left in the rain is asking when her mother is coming back. The receptionist paused, clearly confused by the strange, ominous nature of the message, but promised to pass it along immediately. I hung up the phone and smashed it to pieces with a heavy iron mallet in my workshop. The paranoid waiting game immediately commenced. Every time a car drove slowly past my shop, my heart hammered violently against my ribs. Every time the floorboards creaked, I checked the deadbolts. I knew my sister. I knew the terrifying length she would go to in order to protect her meticulously constructed lies. By poking the beast, I had effectively started a ticking clock. She couldn't ignore the message. It threatened the very foundation of her impending marriage. I loaded my grandfather's old shotgun and sat in the dark, waiting for her arrival. The confrontation happened exactly 3 nights later. It was pouring rain again, an eerie echo of the night she had originally abandoned Lily. At 2 in the morning, a sleek, black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb outside my shop, its headlights slicing through the heavy downpour. I watched through the blinds as a figure in a dark trench coat stepped out, bypassing the front door and walking deliberately toward the secluded back alley entrance. When the sharp, rhythmic knocking started, I didn't hesitate. I unlocked the heavy steel door, stepping back into the shadows of the workshop. Chloe walked in, shaking the water from her expensive coat. She looked entirely alien to me. The icy blonde hair, the perfect teeth, the overwhelming scent of a perfume that cost more than my monthly rent. She was a terrifying masterpiece of fraudulent engineering. She didn't offer a greeting, nor did she ask how her daughter was doing. She simply unzipped her coat and tossed a heavy, dark canvas duffel bag onto my workbench. The zipper was slightly open, revealing thick, banded stacks of $100 bills. "There is exactly $100,000 in that bag," Chloe said, her voice completely flat, devoid of any human emotion. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a thick, meticulously drafted legal document, slapping it down next to the cash. "It is a permanent, ironclad non-disclosure agreement and a full relinquishment of my parental rights. You sign the paper, you take the money, and you legally adopt the girl. If you ever contact me, or Julian, or anyone associated with the Vance family ever again, my lawyers will completely destroy your life." It was the ultimate, sickening bribe. She was actively trying to purchase her own child's permanent erasure with cold, hard cash. I stared at the thick stacks of currency, the brutal reality of her sociopathy radiating from the canvas bag. This wasn't a desperate mother making a difficult choice. This was a vicious corporate buyout of a human soul. I looked up slowly, meeting her cold, calculating eyes. "You think you can just buy a clean slate?" I asked, my voice barely above a dangerous whisper. I picked up the heavy legal document, feeling the weight of the thick, expensive paper, and deliberately tore it directly in half, letting the pieces flutter to the dusty concrete floor. "Take your dirty money and get out of my shop, Chloe. You disgust me." The polished, high society mask she had meticulously crafted instantly shattered. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You are a pathetic, broke carpenter, Marcus," she spat, taking a threatening step forward, her manicured finger jabbing aggressively at my chest. "Julian's family has politicians and judges on their permanent payroll. If you don't take this deal, I will walk into a police station tomorrow morning. I will tell them that I left Lily here for a weekend, and you violently refused to give her back. I will claim kidnapping, Marcus. I will use Julian's legal team to bury you so deep in federal charges that you will never see the light of day." The sheer audacity of the threat temporarily paralyzed me. She was fully prepared to weaponize the justice system to destroy my life and rip Lily away, simply to protect her fragile, fraudulent empire. She zipped up her coat, grabbed the bag of cash, and turned toward the heavy steel door. "You have 48 hours to reconsider," she sneered, stepping back into the rainy night. I realized that playing defense was no longer an option against a deeply ruthless enemy. The moment the taillights of her SUV disappeared, the paralyzing shock morphed into a cold, terrifying clarity. I was completely outgunned. My meager savings and blue-collar background were absolutely no match for the endless financial resources and brutal legal firepower of the Vance family. If Chloe launched her kidnapping narrative first, I would be fighting from inside a prison cell. The next morning, I withdrew the last of my savings and walked into the sterile, intimidating downtown offices of Elias Thorne. Elias was a cynical, razor-sharp family court attorney who had built a fierce reputation for destroying bullies. I sat across his polished desk and laid out the entire horrific narrative: the duffel bag, the fake identity, the massive bribe, and the devastating kidnapping threat. Elias listened in absolute silence, his eyes narrowing as he reviewed the digital receipts and the timeline I had meticulously compiled. "She's banking on the power imbalance," Elias finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "If we just file for emergency custody now, she will execute her threat. The Vance lawyers will tie us up in litigation for years, and they will drag that poor little girl through hell." He leaned forward, tapping a silver pen against the mahogany desk. "We cannot fight a traditional legal battle, Marcus. We have to completely annihilate her credibility before she even has a chance to strike. We need to expose Clara Montgomery as a total fabrication in front of the very people she is trying to impress." Elias outlined a strategy that was incredibly risky, but entirely necessary. We had to build an ironclad trap that would detonate publicly. We needed undeniable, self-incriminating proof that she knowingly and willingly abandoned her own flesh and blood. To gather the ammunition we desperately needed, I had to swallow my pride and play the role of a terrified, defeated man. I purchased a high-quality digital voice recorder and taped it securely beneath the collar of my work shirt. Then, I sent Chloe a carefully worded text message from my burner phone. "I don't want to go to jail. Call me so we can figure out the money and the paperwork." The bait was perfectly set. She called exactly 10 minutes later, her voice dripping with a sickening blend of triumph and utter contempt. "I knew you would eventually see reason, Marcus," she gloated. I kept my voice shaky, feigning absolute submission. "I just need to be absolutely sure," I stammered into the receiver. "If I sign this NDA and take the cash, you are promising to never come back for Lily? You are admitting you permanently left her here 3 months ago?" The silence on the line was thick and tense, but her massive ego ultimately overrode her caution. "Yes, Marcus," she sighed, clearly annoyed by having to spell it out. I dropped her off. "I am marrying Julian in 3 weeks. Clara Montgomery does not have a 7-year-old daughter from a previous, pathetic life. She is your problem now. Just sign the papers and take the payout." The digital recorder captured every single word with crystal clear, devastating perfection. She had just confessed to premeditated child abandonment and attempted bribery, completely destroying her kidnapping narrative in one fell swoop. I immediately drove to Elias's office, my hands shaking with adrenaline, and handed over the audio file. We finally had the murder weapon, but we needed the perfect location to pull the trigger. Elias smiled grimly and handed me a glossy, gold-embossed invitation to a highly exclusive event. The invitation Elias placed on the desk was for the Vance family annual winter gala, a glittering, high-security charity event heavily covered by the local press. It was the exact environment where Chloe's fabricated persona of Clara Montgomery would be fully on display, surrounded by the elite society she had lied to infiltrate. "Julian Vance is hosting it," Elias explained, leaning back in his leather chair. "It's a fortress. Security will be incredibly tight, but I represent the catering company that handles the estate's private events." Using a complex legal loophole and calling in a massive favor, Elias secured me a credential as a specialized vendor, a logistical supervisor for the antique floral displays. It was the ultimate Trojan horse. I spent the next 2 days preparing for the most terrifying night of my entire life. I bought a cheap but sharply tailored dark suit, ensuring I wouldn't immediately stand out among the billionaire attendees. Inside the breast pocket, I carried the digital recorder, the original police report of Lily's abandonment that Elias had preemptively filed, and the printed receipts proving Chloe's identity fraud. The contrast between my reality and her fantasy was incredibly jarring. While I was meticulously planning to detonate a high-society scandal, Lily was sitting in my living room, quietly coloring a picture of a house, completely oblivious to the war being waged for her safety. I kissed her forehead before leaving with the babysitter, making a silent vow that this nightmare would end tonight. I drove toward the heavily guarded country club, my stomach twisting into violent knots. I flashed my forged vendor credentials at the massive iron gates and slowly drove inside. The Vance family estate was a sprawling, opulent fortress of unimaginable wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne. I navigated the glittering ballroom, keeping my head down, entirely hyper-focused on my target. The sheer arrogance of the room was suffocating. Finally, I spotted her. Chloe was holding court near a massive ice sculpture, dripping in diamonds, her arm linked tightly with Julian Vance. She looked incredibly smug, radiating the confident glow of a woman who genuinely believed she had successfully buried her past. I waited patiently in the shadows until Julian guided her toward a secluded, softly lit VIP lounge reserved for the family. The moment the heavy oak doors closed behind them, I completely bypassed the distracted security guard and slipped inside. The room was incredibly quiet, smelling of expensive cigars and aged bourbon. Julian was pouring a drink when I stepped out from behind a heavy velvet curtain, locking the heavy doors behind me with a loud, definitive click. Chloe turned around, her fake, practiced smile instantly melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "Marcus!" she gasped, the color draining entirely from her face. Julian frowned, looking confusedly between us. "Clara, who is this man? How did you get in here?" he demanded, his authoritative voice echoing in the quiet room. The power dynamic had instantly shifted. She wasn't surrounded by her expensive lawyers or protected by a threatening text message. She was completely trapped in a small room with the truth she had tried to buy. I reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out the heavy digital audio recorder. Julian took a protective step toward Chloe, but I held up my hand, my voice echoing with a terrifying, absolute calm. "My name is Marcus. I am her older brother, and her name is not Clara Montgomery." I didn't give Chloe a single second to deploy her lies. I pressed play on the digital recorder. The clear, undeniable audio of her sneering voice filled the opulent VIP room. Julian stood completely paralyzed as he listened to his immaculate fiancée confess to abandoning her 7-year-old daughter and offering a $100,000 bribe to buy her own child's silence. Chloe lunged forward frantically, desperately trying to snatch the device from my hand, but I stepped back smoothly, tossing a thick manila folder directly onto the low crystal coffee table in front of Julian. "That contains the police report for child abandonment, the receipts for her fraudulent identity change, and her original birth certificate," I stated methodically. Julian's face turned an ashen, sickly gray. He looked at the documents, then slowly turned his gaze toward the woman he was supposed to marry. The glittering, perfect empire she had violently sacrificed her own flesh and blood to build was collapsing in real time. "Julian, please, he's lying, he's extorting me," Chloe screamed, her voice completely devoid of the cultured, high-society accent she had faked. But the evidence was absolutely overwhelming. Julian didn't scream or shout. He simply backed away from her, as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. He looked at her with a mixture of profound disgust and absolute horror, the realization of her sociopathy sinking in. He picked up the folder, bypassed her completely, and signaled his massive security team immediately. The fallout was incredibly swift and absolutely devastating. Julian Vance did not simply cancel the wedding. His family's legal team launched a massive offensive. They handed over my meticulously gathered evidence to the local district attorney. Chloe wasn't just exposed as a liar. She was formally indicted for felony fraud and criminal child abandonment. Her high society friends vanished instantly, and the luxury apartment was quickly repossessed. Stripped of her fake identity and her wealthy mark, she was left entirely alone to face the brutal consequences of her sociopathic ambition. With Elias's brilliant navigation, the family court proceedings were remarkably brief. Chloe's parental rights were permanently and completely severed, not by a dirty bribe, but by the heavy, righteous hand of the law. I stood in the quiet, sterile courtroom, holding Lily's small hand, as the judge formally granted my petition for full legal adoption. I was no longer just an overwhelmed uncle. I was entirely, legally her father. It has been a year since that terrifying night at the gala. The restoration shop is still quiet, and the rain still washes the color from the streets, but my life is no longer defined by solitude. Blood does not automatically make a family. Sacrifice, presence, and unwavering protection do. People will go to terrifying lengths to acquire status, destroying everything pure in their path for a glittering crown of lies. But as I watch Lily laughing in the backyard, completely safe and fiercely loved, I know the absolute truth. The quiet, honest life we built from the shattered pieces is the greatest wealth imaginable.